from the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OpenLine. I'm Carrie Sharp. Glad to be back with you tonight. This is OpenLine. I hope you will chime in our topic. We are talking about the refugee resettlement in Nashville. Refugees coming from Afghanistan. I have a wonderful person to lead us through this topic and offer great insight. She has been doing this for decades now. Louisa Saratora is joining me tonight. She's with the Tennessee Office for Refugees. Louisa, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It is so good to see you. Just a little note to our producer. I can't hear Louisa right now. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, Emila. All right, Louisa, it is good to hear you tonight. Thank you for spending the next hour with us. I have been intrigued by what is going to happen ever since we saw the Taliban takeover, heartbreaking images coming out of Afghanistan, people trying to flee. You have been doing this work for a very long time. So first, introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. I'm Louisa Saratora. I'm the State Refugee Coordinator. I work for the Tennessee Office for Refugees, which is a Department of Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Nashville. We're a little bit different than our Refugee Services, Direct Services Program, which is also a component of Catholic Charities. We are an administrative office that coordinates and administers refugee services across the state. In most states, a state office administers those federal funds from the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and when that is not the case, ORR, that's that federal office, designates a nonprofit to serve in that role. And we've been doing that since 2008. We created a separate department, and we partner with directly serving organizations in Middle Tennessee, as well as in Memphis, Knoxville, and Chattanooga.
And you have been doing this quite a while. You started as a caseworker, I believe.
I did. I started as a caseworker 25 years ago in Catholic Charities. And it was an incredibly challenging and incredibly rewarding work. And I have not been able to leave it since. So.
I love it. I want to remind our folks who are watching at home, this is OpenLine. This is your chance to call in. Louisa is an expert on this refugee resettlement program. So if you have questions about how this is going to work and what it specifically will look like for Tennessee, she's the woman to answer your questions. I know that we already have a call on the line. I'm going to go to Rob real quick before we move ahead. Rob, are you with me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, no problem with refugees coming over. I'm just curious, we got all these mandates with everybody that works in the United States are supposed to be taking the vaccination, but we got people coming over from the border that ain't having to be stabbed or jabbed with a pin or the shot there. I'm trying to figure out what is actually right. I'm an independent, and I'm not Republican or Democrat, so I'm just trying to figure out what's going on, put everybody on the planes that's not wearing masks, not vaccinated, and you don't know what's going on. But if y'all could help me out, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay.
I love everybody. Y'all have a good day.
Hey, thank you, Rob. Thank you for calling in. It really is a fair question because we really do have two competing news stories right now with COVID-19 and now with the refugees coming here to make this their home. So how does that go together, Louisa?
Yeah, to say something quickly about the traditional refugee program, and I know we're going to focus on Afghans today, but that program has been really severely impacted, for a couple of years now, but especially this past year, even as the Biden administration has raised the numbers that could be admitted to the U.S., it just has not been safe to travel for a lot of the folks that are overseas. They're in places in which COVID is not contained. Folks are working remotely, or they're not able to work out in the field at all. And so it's impacting processing. And so we've definitely seen folks not traveling because it just has not been safe to process people in groups or even individually, and then to travel as well. And then once folks do travel, COVID protocols are a really important part of that travel screening before folks go. So they have a complete medical screening and then specific COVID testing before they're ever on a plane to come to the U.S. And that's true of the Afghans that we'll talk about today. There's a few different pathways that folks are coming to the U.S. I think a lot of what we'll talk about today are folks entering the U.S. through a humanitarian parole status, and they are currently being housed on U.S. military bases and receiving processing there, including some very specific health screening, vaccinations, COVID testing at the time that they enter the U.S. And so that's something that the administration and our federal partners take very, very seriously.
And I think we need to back up just a little bit so viewers who are watching know, and hopefully will call in, because I love having folks as part of the conversation. When we're talking about refugee resettlement, it is not the same thing as when we talk about the immigration crisis at the border, and they can be easily confused and sometimes are.
That's very true. Yeah. So the folks that we are talking about are folks that, including through the Afghan programs that we'll talk about, are folks who are experiencing a humanitarian crisis. They are at risk if they stayed in their home country due to persecution or fear of persecution. And they are they are arriving to the U.S. Under those humanitarian protections, which is different than folks that may be fleeing very similar experiences, but the process is very different. And the refugee program is very structured and stringent and has definitive screening and vetting protocols, several layers of interviews, medical screening, just it's very time and labor intensive, complicated, interagency, and that is a little bit different than folks entering on the border and seeking asylum.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are three main pathways currently available to Afghans to become refugees here in the United States. Can we talk about those three different ways to just jump into this?
Sure. Yeah. So one is called the Special Immigrant Visa Program, or SIV, you may hear. These are folks who supported our U.S. military overseas. So they worked as interpreters or translators. And the vast majority of those went through that entire screening process overseas. Again, that's a really stringent security process. They have to be referred by their U.S. military employer. Many of them were able to be evacuated to safety as part of that evacuation process before the U.S. pulled out. There also were some folks that were very close to the end of that process, and so received that the end of that processing here in the U.S. on a military base. We do see and expect to continue to see refugees come from Afghanistan. So these are folks who have made it safely out of Afghanistan to another country and are able to avail themselves of the United Nations or another NGO. Most of those folks are also going to require a referral from a U.S. employer, a contractor, NGO, journalist. And then there's this group that is a lot of what I think we're talking about right now, who are being admitted to the U.S. under a process called Humanitarian Parole. It is an admission process for folks who are experiencing a humanitarian emergency. It's not a permanent status, so it allows folks to enter the U.S., receive medical screening and work authorization, and to be lawfully present for up to 2 years. Most folks that don't have a family relationship that would enable them to apply for legal permanent residence will enter the asylum system. So they'll apply for asylum. And they need to do that within a year of their arrival in the U.S.
Let's take a pause and get right back to the phones. Freddie has called in. Freddie, good evening to you. Question or comment? Freddie, you are on. Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, this is Freddie. I just got a couple questions.
Okay.
And I like to applaud. You are good at the way you answer your questions. It's like you've been taught very well. A couple questions. Has Governor Lee got his transparency that he was talking about that he was needing from the U.S. government on the vetting process, on the backgrounds of these people that he is volunteering to take in to the state? Has that been done? Has the transparency been there? Has he got the background on them? Where these people come from? What are they doing? How are we going to take care of them? What benefits are they going to be eligible for? And the second one is, I heard her made a comment, a couple pathways in. Well, how many pathways are there in?
Well, we just talked about that. There's
when you're a foreigner.
Well, under this program, there are 3. We just went through that, so but we'll touch base on it again. But we just did go over that. Any more questions, Freddie?
That'll be it.
Okay, hang up, and I'm going to let Louisa answer so you can listen to your TV. It's just easier that way. So let's talk about the transparency issue. Governor Lee has brought that up. How does that work? Because I've heard you say there are a lot of different government agencies and private ones with their hands in this.
Yeah, so the Department of Homeland Security is actually the lead agency on Operation Allies Welcome. So they are leading an interagency coordinated effort to screen and vet folks overseas before they even are traveling to the U.S. And so those involve things like biometrics and biographical screenings, a variety of law enforcement and national security databases. I know that this is a concern of a lot of people, including Governor Lee, and I can't speak to what he's been, what has been communicated with him, but I can share that we've been in touch with the governor's office and have been sharing information about what we learn, and also that the administration appointee to lead this effort of Operation Allies Welcome is a former governor himself, and he knows the kinds of things that it's Governor Markle from Delaware, and he knows the kinds of things that governors want to know, and he's been really proactive about reaching out and communicating directly with governors' offices. So I feel confident that Governor Lee knows where to ask those questions and get that information.
And another thing Freddie had a question about was, what benefits do people receive once they get here?
Yeah. That's a really great question, and there's actually a difference in those different pathways that we talked about. SIVs and refugees are eligible for Office of Refugee Resettlement funded benefits and services. So those can include some temporary cash and medical benefits, as well as employment services, case management, some specialized support services, English language classes. Humanitarian parolees that we've been talking about, they are not currently eligible for those benefits. So that's why I think a lot of you have been seeing a lot of news in the media seeking, and we've had a real outpouring of community supports, knowing that those the supports in place right now for this population are limited. We know that there's some efforts going on at some much higher levels of government than I can speak to make some progress in that area and perhaps ensure a broader eligibility for benefits and services. But at this moment, they are going to receive initial resettlement and integration services for 30 to 90 days. So things like meeting you at the airport, assistance with housing, referrals to community services, access to medical care, registering your children in school, the kinds of things that most of us think about when we think of refugee resettlement, that sort of initial intense service period. The Department of State has actually created a parallel program, which mirrors that resettlement program nearly exactly in funding and services and network. So our resettlement partners that have been doing this work for a long time will do that as well with Afghans who arrive in our communities, regardless of their status. They'll be able to be served through one of those two programs.
And Freddie, I wanted to tell you something that I found helpful today. If you want to find out more about the transparency of all this and the security screening, go on the DHS website, which is dhs.gov, and then search for information under the Operation Allies Welcome, and that will detail the screening process. So hopefully that will help you out. Again, it's dhs.gov, and then look for Operation Allies Welcome. We have to sneak in a quick break here. When we come back, more of your questions, and we'll talk more about this refugee resettlement program. Stay with us.